Far More Than We Think, Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 11. There is no comparison. Most of us will have some misgivings about the world being in perfect balance. Reading a newspaper or watching the news on TV will reveal things on a daily basis that appear to be far from perfect. We also have our own mixed bag of experiences, some of which have been unpleasant and painful, and again, these cannot be described in any way as perfect. I don't want to belabor this point because my own thinking has evolved over a period of time, and I guess it will be the same for you too. I should stress, I'm not saying that everything in the world is perfect. If we focus on any one bad thing, the world as a whole will not look good. The higher perspective is that good and bad have to exist simultaneously in order to balance out, so bad things will inevitably happen. It's the balance that's perfect, not any individual aspect or experience of it. Setting aside for now the issue of whether the balance is perfect, another inevitable matter arising from the relative world is the notion of comparison. We've seen that things exist in two polar opposite forms, and these comprise the theoretical boundaries of a spectrum of possibilities. Taking our example of dark and light again, we see the possibility of an infinite number of shades between the two extremes. This gives rise to the existence of comparison. One shade of grey could be described as lighter than a given standard, and another might be described as darker. We can apply these spectrums of possibility to pretty much every aspect of our lives, and the opportunities for comparison are endless. Everything exists relative to something else, and therefore, by definition, is comparable. Comparison, when used as an objective identification of similarities and differences between two things, is a useful technique in life, but it can become problematic when we introduce judgment into the equation. Preference is one thing, but judgment of others and ourselves can and does lead to no end of dissatisfaction and unhappiness. Again, I speak from experience as to how I used to view the world and how I now see it as I observe what is happening. Everything was about comparing myself to others. As well as wanting to be normal, I wanted to be successful. On any given spectrum of measurement, I was constantly comparing and contrasting. I considered myself superior to some, inferior to others, or sometimes on par. I would never admit it publicly, of course, but privately I wanted to be better and do better than other people. This underlying competitive streak permeated every aspect of my life and included career, status, finances, house, car, possessions, wife, children, holidays, hobbies, friends, and so on. I knew where I thought I stood in respect to these things, and my drive was always to better my position and prove myself a success. Well, competition has its place in the natural world and the market economy, but this was me against the world on a constant basis. Everywhere I looked, I saw people I envied and things I wanted, or I saw people I looked down upon and things I considered beneath me. I had a constant real-time measurement system spinning around in my head, and I now see that this was an obvious recipe for discontentment. One could argue that writing this book is another example of my ambition to succeed, but there is a deeper motive. As I write these words, I find it difficult to believe that I live my life in this competitive way. but the truth is, I did. Mine was a life driven by the basic survival instinct of fear, but in reality the only thing that was under threat was my own pride. Ironically, this resulted in a lifestyle that caused a deep depression and ended up threatening my very survival. I'm not sure whether I may have been an extreme example of the comparison mentality, but I do see evidence of it everywhere in society. This seems to be a collective recipe for dissatisfaction. We all seem to be trying to get somewhere better, and meanwhile we grumble about where we are right now. Happiness tends to exist at some imaginary point in the future, when various conditions in our own minds will hopefully be met. This may relate to health, wealth, relationships, or any other aspect of our lives, but there always seems to be something that could be better. This perceived condition of lack will always exist in our minds as long as we continue to compare ourselves with others. It's the inevitable consequence of comparative judgment. Understanding the cycle of the mind helps us shed light on how we can break free from this perception of lack. When I consider any aspect of my life good or bad, I'm comparing my situation either with others or with how I think it should be. This is my imagined truth, and if pressed, I would probably have to admit to having a view of how I would like things to be for every one of the numerous attributes of my life. However good things are, I would think they could always be better. If I look at the apparent truth, then any aspect of my life will obviously be somewhere on the spectrum of good and bad, with some people worse off than me and some people better off. It is the objective reality, and will always be so, even if I move up or down the scale. The actual truth arises from our discussion of balance in the previous chapter, where we saw that there will always be a range of possibilities for any given thing. A range of outcomes between two extremes is the natural order of things. The underlying truth is that the universe is in perfect balance, and it is necessary for good and bad to exist. The fact that I sit somewhere along a spectrum of possibilities is not only inevitable, it's required. I'm a human being, and my overall set of positions on the infinite number of spectrums will be mine and mine alone. Once I see the underlying truth of this, I'm much more easily able to accept where I am in life. In fact, the need for comparison begins to fall away, because it simply no longer matters. Once I stop comparing myself with others, there's no need for me to be unhappy with where I am. Feelings such as superiority, inferiority, smugness, envy, jealousy, guilt, greed, and selfishness disappear. I can still seek to change and grow, but I can do so from a position where I'm already happy. I can also be happy that other people are where they are too. It's all just as it should be. Once our basic needs are met, everything else is a bonus. We can put ourselves under enormous stress by striving to be successful, and often the underlying cause is our relentless comparison with others. Comparisons include our parents, siblings, peers, rivals, and so on. These comparisons may be of our own making, or we may seek to please others by trying to rise to their expectations. I've now found that simply accepting myself as I am and where I am in life has removed the single biggest cause of stress in my life, the fear of failure. I have stopped trying. to be anything other than what I am, and I'm content just being exactly as I am. This idea of contentment can also apply to the more abstract aspects of life, such as happiness, morality, and indeed spirituality itself. Again, these things exist on a spectrum, and there's no need for comparison. Interestingly, it's been my experience that spiritual growth has brought about improvements in all parts of my life, often without any conscious effort on my part. We all have choices, and we ultimately set our own priorities. Accepting things as they are has given me the breathing space to give priority to spiritual matters, and it turns out that spirituality is the key to all aspects of well-being and happiness. The horse and cart analogy works here. If the horse is spirituality, and the cart is the material and emotional content of my life, there's no doubt that I used to have the cart before the horse. By accepting the cart as it is and focusing on the horse instead, I've found that I'm making much better progress, and miraculously the cart seems to be getting bigger and better all on its own. There's no real need for comparison. In order to overcome our obsession with comparison, we need to gradually adopt the attitude of acceptance. We simply see that not everyone can be at the top end of the spectrum, so we accept things exactly as they are. This seems counterintuitive at first, but ultimately it does make sense. Acceptance is the cornerstone in the building of a spiritual life, so it makes sense now to have a more detailed look at what this means and how it can work powerfully in our favour.